I'm Elisabetta Lazzaro. I'm professor of creative economy at HKU University of the Arts Utrecht in the Netherlands. Although I'm not Dutch, I'm Italian, and more precisely, I'm original from the other side of the Adriatic Sea, as I come from near Venice. I'm very glad to be here. It's my first time in Banja Luka. It's also my very first time in Bosnia-Herzegovina. So I'm really thrilled to be here with you. How many of you are creative entrepreneurs, creative professionals, practitioners? Please raise your hands. What about the others? Are you students? How many students here? Wow. And what about the others? Are you public officers, curious? Are you waiting for a movie? Okay. So, what does a creative economy means? By the way, I forgot my... It is somewhere. Thank you. So, creative economy, what is my job? My job is this one at HKU University of the Arts, is to teach, to research, and to collaborate with current and future cultural and creative practitioners. HKU is the largest university for the arts in the Netherlands. We have all the arts, culture, and creative disciplines represented here. And my job as a cultural economist is to help them to make more informed, strategic as well as operational decisions for what concerns their career and their job. So creative economy means economics, business, and policy analysis applied to the arts, culture, and the creative industry, which means teaching, doing applied research, and industry collaboration. At the moment, we have several projects, collaborative projects at national as well as European and international levels of applied research in various aspects of the creative economy. And this afternoon I would like to touch base on some of them, also to show you what is the typical output of doing applied research in creative economy. So what do I mean, first of all, by arts, culture, and creative industries? I mean a wide range of sectors, including the visual arts, the performing arts, cultural heritage, museums, archives, as well as the wider realm of the creative industries, so media, audiovisual, talking about audiovisual. Thank you. Film, television, architecture, design, fashion, advertising, video games, and so on and so forth. From an economic and business perspective, we are interested to investigate and to disentangle crucial aspects in terms of production, creation, financing, distribution, and consumption of cultural and creative goods. That is, how is the content generated, distributed, accessed. And in all that, digitizations does play an increasing role. And talking about the economy of the arts, culture, and the creative industries, there are important facts that everybody needs to know. And these facts we can know thanks to the job of economists, statisticians, sociologists, and other social scientists working in this field. So the major facts about the CCI tell us that the CCI represent at least 3.5% of the gross domestic product. So it's it's an important sector also from the economic perspective. And it is a sector that generates an annual turnover of 500 billion euros, which is a lot of money. And talking about people, this sector employs almost 7 million people in Europe. What is the reality? The reality of the firms operating in this sector is that they are micro-sized, so the European average is about 2 employees per company. And in this situation, there is an increasing trend toward for-profit, differently from public and not-for-profit organizations, and self and alternative economic sustainability, including also the famous crowdfunding. I will speak a little bit later. The entrepreneurs, creative entrepreneurs, do play an increasing role in such a context. And from a policy perspective, entrepreneurship plus creativity plus innovation are considered the key drivers for the economy. And this is from many perspectives. I mentioned here the UNESCO, the European Union, but also at national and regional levels. I don't know if you are familiar with any of these people here. Do you recognize any of them? You have Leonardo da Vinci in the center. Who else? Einstein, top left. Who else? Picasso, top right. And Armstrong. Okay, I don't ask you to recognize the other people. So what do you think is the link between all these people? Any guess? Sorry? They are famous in pop culture, very well. Some other thoughts? Pioneers, very well, excellent. Other ideas? And, sorry, pioneers of what? Visionaries, very well. But I like this word, pioneers. Pioneers of what? Creating, thinking, engineering, innovation. So all these words really account for creativity, entrepreneurship, and innovation. How? Well, these are the links we can consider about them. So Leonardo, 500 years ago, was already inventing, at least virtually, flying machines. And 500 years later, we were able to fly on the moon. Unfortunately, the drawings of Leonardo were discovered and were published only beginning of last century. So what a great waste for innovation and technology. Pablo Picasso, Demoiselle d'Avignon, in 1907, the invention of cubism, which inspired so much Einstein and the theory of relativity, published in 1912. By the way, the two geniuses were communicating between each other. And in more recent times, a music DJ, operating a quite sophisticated music console, well, you have to know that this device has been applied in the health industry in order to make a very delicate microsurgery possible, thanks to DJ music console. So these are just a few examples of the many, many examples that we can think about of culture and creativity driving innovation in the whole economy, in the whole society. These are not just anecdotal examples. We have plenty of them. Said that, the story, unfortunately, is not only pink, is not only positive, because together with opportunities, we have challenges. But it is up to us, especially if we have an entrepreneurial mindset, to consider these challenges as opportunities. And here I've listed some of them. By the way, I'm referring to some of my publications because as scholars we are also expected to publish our work besides collaborating with the industry. So these challenges and opportunities include an increasing internationalization and globalization versus regional and local dimensions and also corresponding policy, the shrinking of public and traditional private funding, which are particularly important, especially for the non-for-profit public sector. And talking about audiences, customers, there are new participatory models, including interaction and co-creation, and technology is quite supportive in that. And by the way, there is an overall digital disruption in the creation, production, distribution, consumption, participation, preservation, if you think about cultural heritage, and financing of creative content. And we will see some examples. In that, education plays a major role in allowing creative professionals to operate this reality in terms of skills development. And talking about key drivers from an economic perspective, it's very important to consider not only direct effects, but also indirect effects of creative content onto innovation, tangible as well as intangible innovations, like creative processes, which are extremely important. Furthermore, from a social perspective, the arts, culture, and creative industries bear an important, represent an important factor in order to foster cultural diversity and also better quality of life and well-being. What about creative entrepreneurs? So research on creative entrepreneurs is relatively recent. Well, for the creative entrepreneurs who are present here, maybe you don't even think about being a creative entrepreneur. You just act as a creative entrepreneur. You work as a creative entrepreneur. But for instance, one of the contributions of research is to allow you to make a step forward, backward, and to have a wider reflection on what you are doing, where you are doing that, what is your context, what other agents are doing, and other stakeholders with whom you, and partners with whom you are working. So it is important to reflect on the key features of being a creative entrepreneur. And these features include labor market and worker conditions. There is not such a status, not even of artists, imagine, of creative entrepreneurs. So all that contributes to, unfortunately, quite high levels of risk, uncertainty, and also failure. But the opportunity here is that failure for creative entrepreneurs is not considered so negatively. It is dealt with in a quite positive way. So maybe in this, creative entrepreneurs can teach something to other entrepreneurs in other industries. it is also important to see, to look at the idiosyncrasies of firm creation, growth patterns, and resilience of creative entrepreneurs. So the main argument here is that creative entrepreneurs are not entrepreneurs like the others. They are a specific, a special type of entrepreneurs. So, but unfortunately, creative entrepreneurs, how do they create value and how to assess their value? The problem of creative entrepreneurs is that what they create is usually intangible. So, for instance, if you have to go to a bank and ask for to lend money, this is a very difficult aspect because you cannot really show, you cannot present guarantees for your possible risk of failure. So how to assess that, how to demonstrate the output you are generating. And this affects the financing structure overall. That's why we need a special financial mechanism for creative entrepreneurs. And talking about skills, and in particular managerial and business skills and financial skills, we can observe that on average creative entrepreneurs have lower skills than other entrepreneurs. So they need more educational support. And how do they cope with all these difficulties? Well, networking is a big asset in that, in order to assess information, to lower risk, to access also financing, to generate trust, and so on. Not to speak about gender patterns. In our sector, there are interesting gender patterns worth studying. And in all that, of course, once again, there is a large impact of digitization. So, how to assess the creative entrepreneur's value? As I mentioned, it's not an easy exercise. And why, first of all, it is important to assess the value of creative entrepreneurs? Well, for the reasons I mentioned before, in the sense that if you need to assess funding through traditional as well more innovative channels, you need to demonstrate what is your value. And you have also to demonstrate that to the other stakeholders you are dealing with, like policymakers, like private funds willing to invest in what you're doing. Examples of indicators are new enterprise formation, growth performance, so how to show what is your performance, are common traditional indicators useful in order to fully show your value in terms of sales, number of employees, return on sales, growth in sales, number of employees. For instance, creative entrepreneurs have only 2 employees on average in Europe. And how to patent, how to protect your intellectual property rights. These are also very important issue. And what is overall your contribution to innovation? I brought the example of Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci has not been considered for centuries as an inventor, simply because his drawings were not published. So his full value was not captured, was not recognized by society, unfortunately. What are the spillovers, that is the indirect effects generated? And in order to prove all that, we need, in order to do applied research, data. And unfortunately, data are not that available, are not that trustable. But still, this is also a challenge for scholars like us in order to tell a more informed and complete story. Some empiric examples working with data, with available data, are quite interesting for creative entrepreneurs and for the whole economy and society, in the sense that we have demonstrated that if we compare creative entrepreneurs with non-creative entrepreneurs, that is all the other entrepreneurs in all other industries, in all other sectors, creative entrepreneurs are better in recovering from crisis. And they are also recovering more quickly. And these positive trends persist. And how do they resist to crisis? Simply they downsize their enterprises, which implies that they are particularly flexible compared to other entrepreneurs. So from a policy perspective, entrepreneurs are also interesting because they compensate for unemployment in the economy. Furthermore, in terms of firm formation, they present higher numbers, higher rates of firm formation, and they are also pretty much sustainable in periods of economic growth. The thing is that they can't be, they still have to rely on public policy in order to be able to do that. So there is still a role played by public policy. As I mentioned, we have different collaborations going on at national as well as European international levels. This is just the next event we are organizing in Amsterdam next week. So if you happen to be in the Netherlands next week, you are very welcome. This is a project on creative entrepreneurs in the Netherlands. So we met with the creative entrepreneurs with different sectors, from the visual arts to media, design, architecture, fashion, music, performing arts, and we did in-depth investigation. What are the major barriers for them in order to work as entrepreneurs in the Netherlands? We have worked with Dutch as well as international entrepreneurs, and next week we will present some of the results. By the way, this is an example at national level of collaboration between the government, so the National Agency for Applied Research, different partners in academia as well as professional partners. So another example we are working on is alternative and complementary financing in culture and creative industries, namely crowdfunding. From the perspective of regulation, because unfortunately there is a huge potential of crowdfunding, but the bad news are that because of lack of regulation, this potential is highly untapped. So people, professionals and practitioners are not so much using this important instrument of financing because of the lack of regulation. Our claim is that the first results of our investigation is that comparing the US with Europe, which are the two largest markets in the world, some regulation is necessary in order to allow operators to access efficiently this market, because so far it is a fragmented market in terms of models, different models of fundraising and crowdfunding, especially even at national level. There are differences between countries, within Europe, within the United States, differences between different sectors of the CCI, which imply different requirements in terms of information skills. By the way, it is also interesting to observe interesting trends about crowdfunding in the CCI, namely partnerships between the private sector, platforms, and public policy makers, because crowdfunding is also a tremendous instrument in order to inform what are the preferences of people, what are the trends. In fact, crowdfunding is important before financing itself, because it has effects on audiences and customers. They allow a better outreach, community involvement, democratization, even though unfortunately we have some superstar effects, that is convergence and concentration of preferences, that is people tend to back always the same projects. By the way, crowdfunding is typically an instrument to fund projects differently from investment crowdfunding, that is equity, and lending crowdfunding, which is rather used in other sectors of the economy. So here we are talking about a reward and donation crowdfunding. From the supply perspective, crowdfunding has also an interesting impact on creation and promotion, because it allows a better project viability thanks to these aspects of interaction and co-creation with customers and the audience. Another example of creativity, innovation, and digitization is represented by the contemporary art market, which has been a quite traditional sector in the CCI. So for us, it's interesting to study because, and to work together also with operators, with like art fairs, art galleries, artist association, because digitization is disrupting the traditional value chain of this quite traditional sector of the CCI. And thanks to the, or because of digitization, content creation is modified, is affected, as it is affected its distribution and its access, besides its financing. So to conclude, and to leave some room for questions and answers, the CCI are important not only for the creative content, but also in economic and societal terms. And our job is to show that. Here I ran a little bit quick. Entrepreneurship and digitization do represent important phenomena in the CCI, where the CCI, and in particular creative entrepreneurs, do have idiosyncrasies, so they are distinguished from other types of entrepreneurs. I mentioned some of the challenges of these entrepreneurs, which require a better organization of education and training, which can play a big role. And how to do this? Well, through an interdisciplinary approach combining research, education, and collaboration with the industry and the government. So I thank you very much for your attention, and I would leave the floor for some questions of yours. Thank you.
I don't need a mic really, but I was just wondering if you could maybe compare the European perspective you were talking about to perhaps more Western trends that you observe for the opportunities and challenges of the creative economy.
So the comparison with
the United States or more Western, this is the European perspective you were talking about.
No, actually, yes, but at the end of the story, I also introduced some extra European perspective, for instance, in the case of crowdfunding. So, for instance, if you compare crowdfunding in the CCI between Europe and the United States, there are quite a lot of common features. First of all, there is a lack of harmonization because, for instance, if you consider California, the states of California, New York, Texas, North Carolina, every state has its own way of doing regulating crowdfunding, if they ever do. Other states, it's completely free. So, and it is rather a self-regulation operated by platforms. So it's the industry itself self-regulating because they do understand that if they offer a clear picture of how the business can be run, they will have more operators and they will be more successful in doing crowdfunding. So there is a need of transparency, and regulation, in a positive sense, can be a powerful tool in order to enable regulation and therefore more transparency. Because of this lack of trust and dangers that can be created by operating crowdfunding. For instance, you can be stolen your idea, your creative idea. Nothing is protecting you. There are serious IPR problems there. So regulation is there also to offer a protection to creative entrepreneurs in order not to be stolen their creative ideas. And this is a common feature with Europe. Of course, the lack of harmonization is even higher in Europe because we are not a federation of states as such, like the United States. And this is a problem because if you have to search for funding, shall you go on a specialized platform, or shall you go on the big platforms like Kickstarter or Indiegogo, etc., etc.? Does it make sense for your business or not? So there is also a sort of fragmented information in order to operate in this mechanism of complementary financing. But the operators are really eager to have more regulation, more transparency and protection. On the other hand, you have to be careful not to regulate too much, because in this way you hinder innovation. If regulation is too much stringent, you lose the motives in order to innovate, in order to create. You don't risk that much any longer. You don't experiment. You don't fail, because fail is part of the creative process. So to respond to your question, there is not that much difference between the United States and Europe, despite the differences at institutional level, because the United States are institutionally different from the European Union and Europe, because we don't consider only European Union, but the European continent as a whole. Yes?
You mentioned intellectual property, and in this regard, I would like to have your view on how much copyright is a limit or an opportunity for the sector, meaning that limits are necessary for the survival and prosperity of artists and creators. But at the same point, they are limiting innovation and the creative process. What's your stand on this? You very well know that recently the European Union adopted new legislation on copyright that is still controversial.
And thank you for your question. Yeah, that was one of the last accomplishments of the European Union before the European elections. Maybe it was a little bit rushed as an accomplishment. It has been quite debated. As you know, from an economic perspective, copyrights are important because they establish a monopoly of the artist, of the creative. That is, thanks to the copyright protection, the artist, the creative says, this is mine, and I am the only one entitled to exploit economically this form of content, because it's the form to be protected and not the content, the idea as such. Monopoly means that the artist, the creative, has the power to exploit economically this creative form. And other people willing to exploit that have to pay royalties to the artist, to the creative. So the debate is confronting this situation of monopoly and the distribution of innovation, the diffusion and access to innovation, and how to pay artists and creatives. Because if they lose this monopoly, how they are gonna make money out of their creative and artistic ideas? This is the big debate, because of course, if we consider the stakes from the society perspective, the society would like to have free diffusion of ideas, of creative content, and therefore, and its forms. But if you put yourself in the artist's creative shoes, are there other forms of paying, of financing the professional artist, the professional creative, spending her time and resources in generating creative goods and processes? This is the big question. The thing is that, as I try to show, the CCI is such a quite a diverse a multi-layered sector that we can't not even imagine to have one single copyright protection mechanism. We need really to diversify that. Digitization can be an important tool in helping to pay back creative and artists, at the same time allowing some more free diffusions of idea and creative content, for which, by the way, the artists and creatives are the first ones to ask for. So the dilemma is also internal to the CCI itself. So I think we are done for this session. So thank you very much, and feel free to join me during the coffee break. Thank you.